This is a picture of Bill Hannock taken in Madison Square Garden in 1950. He's riding a horse called Too Late. Hi, I'm Troy Cox. I'm going to attempt to put on tape some things that I remember from 55 years of leather working and saddle making. I am 70 years old now. I started when I was in grade school. I don't even remember where I got my material because there was nothing close that we could buy material. We lived about 35 miles north of Fort Worth in a little town called Rome, Texas. I did a little bit of leather work, and even as a grade school student, I remember bragging about I was going to make a living doing leather work one of these days when I grew up. And Dad and Mom bought a house and built a house in Fort Worth, and we moved to Fort Worth. And I remember a little bit later riding the bus. We lived in a little suburb called River Oaks. It was northwest of downtown Fort Worth. And I would ride a bus downtown Fort Worth and then walk, I don't know, several blocks down to the south part of town, down where the post office building, the old post office building is, which I don't know, 3 or 4 miles from the courthouse to a little bitty hole in the wall leather shop. It was in an old warehouse building right on the railroad track. You had to walk up on the dock to go to the front door, and you go inside, and there was leather stacked everywhere. I don't remember seeing any kits of any kind, maybe some belt strips, but that's where I would go and buy my belt blanks and a little bit of leather to make billfolds. And eventually, I don't remember buying anything there to make purses or anything like that. It was mainly billfolds and belts. And the name of the place was Tandy's. I have talked to a lot of people over the years, other than someone in the Tandy Corporation that knows the history. I have never talked to anybody that remembers buying leather from Tandy's when they were down on the railroad track. Sometime along there, Mr. Tandy either died or retired and turned it over to his son. His name was Charles Tandy. And so Charles moved uptown about a block and a half from the courthouse. And it was a 3-story building, pretty good size. They had a real nice, the first floor was a retail, and it was a real nice store. Probably, I don't know, close to 2,000 square foot. And when I was in high school, I went to work for them. The first thing they asked me to do was to arrange the windows, decorate the windows, which weren't anything other than a little I don't know, 2-foot platform on the inside of the window, and had a little fence on the back side of that, and they just, we set stuff in it, really nothing high tech. We just decorated a little bit with some finished products and some raw material, hardware. We would bring other stuff in. I think we brought in some tree limbs one time and laid it in there and hung some stuff on it. But Tandy's really took off business-wise when Charles took over. I understand that Charles got a hold of some money and was able to increase the volume of the store. They never did any manufacturing down on the railroad track, and when they moved up downtown, the second floor was offices and the third floor was manufacturing. And it had a fourth floor, not 3 floors, it had a fourth floor. Then the fourth floor was used for storage. The manufacturing part was called Cardet, C-A-R-D-E-T, I believe it was. And it was their company that they sold billfolds and belts and purses and all kinds of leather knick-knack stuff. And by then they were building kits, a lot of kits, and selling them in the retail store. All kinds of purses, all kinds of belts and billfolds, and all kinds of billfolds. First time I ever remember seeing a trucker's wallet was not long after I went to work for them. They sold a kit for a trucker's wallet. Name belts was real big back then. Everybody wanted a name on their belt, on the back of their belt. And by that time, I wasn't doing too bad tooling. I had a lot to learn, but I was pretty acceptable. And so I would take, the store would take orders for name belts, and I would take them home and tool them and finish them out and bring them back, and the customer would pick them up. And so there was a big department store right across the street from us, and they had a shoe repair shop. And somebody had come over from there and wanted to know if they could get somebody to make belts for them. And so I went over and talked to them, and so before long I was making their belts also. And there's a company out in Texas right now called Lusky Ryan. And back when I first got to know them, they had a little Western store about a half a block from the courthouse down Fort Worth, and that would put them almost 2 blocks away from Tandy's. Well, I got to know them, and so started making name belts for them. It's Lusky's Western store then. And so around Christmas time and other gift-giving seasons, I was doing a lot of belts. I'd do 8 or 9 belts an evening, even during school. And Dad says that he went in lots of mornings, and I'd be leaned over my workbench, my head down and asleep. He'd have to wake me up and get me awake and get me ready to go to school. But I don't remember making a lot of money, but I sure made a lot of belts. I talked to Don King years after that, and that's why he got started, just making stamping belts. And a lot of people back then got started making belts and billfolds, because a lot of people they wanted the good leather billfolds. They preferred that, most of them, above um, what they could buy in the store. So they were in pretty good demand. And of course, we like to build them, and I all the time learning to do a little bit better and getting a little bit better at it. Um, oh gosh, it's been kind of fun trying to remember all this stuff. While I worked at Tandy's, there was a man there that tooled belts for Cardet and another belt maker there in town, and that's all he did. And but he would come and, well, I say it's all he did. He did that most of the time, but then he'd come into Tandy's, the store, and help us dress windows. And then during the summer, he and I would go out to the boys clubs, YMCA camps around town, and give leather demonstrations and teach classes, and that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. He was a very good leather crafter, a good artist. I remember one time, we had some slack time. We'd got through with all of our stuff, and the kids still had a little bit more time, and so he just picked up a piece of leather and a swivel knife and asked one of the children, said, "What do you want me to draw a picture of?" Well, somebody said a well. So he cut in a picture of an old rock well. And so he asked somebody else, says, "What does that need?" So somebody said, "Well, a bucket." And from there it went on, and he just kept asking kids what to add to it. And before long, well, he had of course, to have a bucket, you had to have a rack to hang the pulley from. So we had to put 2 posts on it, and a bar across the top, and a pulley, and a bucket. And then one of the kids wanted a bird sitting on top of it, and another wanted a rabbit sitting by the side of it, and this and that and the other. And it's just, he was that good an artist. He was just, it didn't matter what they wanted, he put it on there. And he was very good with a swivel knife, very artistic. I was just about ready to graduate from high school. I was going into my senior year, and Mr. West, one of the executives for Tandy's, and at this about that time, for about a year, they had been setting up Tandy leather stores out over Texas, and they were recruiting young people to manage these stores. And they would you had to buy, I think it was $2,000 worth of stock in Tandy Leather Company Corporation to become a manager. But gosh, they would buy your tools, they'd do anything in the world they could do to help you raise the $2,000. And I bought a lot of tools that some of the guys had brought in and sold to them. I got some real good tools and some odd tools that, some of them was even handmade, that the guys had saw a need and decided to make it themselves. So Mr. West, he was, I think, #1 man under Charles Tandy at that time. And I saw him and Mr. Tandy both every morning. They come through the store to go into the office. And one day Mr. West stopped and we were talking, and he said, asked me how long it'd be before I graduate, and I told him, and he said, well, I think you ought to think about getting in the manager training program. I think as young as I was, well, I would have probably had to go in and work a year or 2 years as an assistant somewhere before they would turn the store over to me. But I told him I wasn't really interested in it, and I don't remember now, but I had lots of plans probably about that time to do something else. And he stopped and talked to me 2 or 3 times, and I kept saying that I didn't really want to do it, and so he finally got a little frustrated about it, and, but he accepted it and went on. You can always think about things that you should have done, and especially after you're at my age, well, you can find a few things that you would have done different if you'd have thought about it and really considered it. But I met a man, become a friend of mine years later, and he worked for Radio Shack, which Tandy's in the early years bought Radio Shack as a real small company, and actually built it, and it become bigger than the Tandy, the leather company. But the Tandy Leather Company was still the parent company of Radio Shack, and this man had been a store manager for a good while, and so one day I was telling him about the early years of Tandy's and what Mr. West had tried to get me to do, and he said, well, you really should have done it. He said, I don't know anybody that didn't get in back then that are multi-millionaires today, the ones that stayed with it, because the stock just went crazy, especially after they bought Radio Shack. So I missed out by not making the right choices. I tell young people all the time, your life depends on the choices you make. But I could have made some different choices. Oh, Lord. All righty. I'm going to end up backtracking on a lot of this stuff because somewhere I've tried to keep my thoughts in line and in the time frame, but I keep remembering some other stuff as the time goes by. When I was working in the Tandy store, Mr. West brought down, no, Charles Tandy brought down a box of buckles, trophy type buckles one day, and he said, see if you can do something with these. And what it was they'd stamped out buckles and they'd stamped out figures and tried to spot weld them onto the buckles, bucking horses and bulls and cowboys and that type of stuff, and they were coming off, but it was leaving a good buckle. It just didn't have anything on it. And he mentioned covering it with leather or something, and so I got to playing with it and ended up with covering it with leather, tooling it, and using up the buckles that he had, which was a dozen or so in that box, and they sold real good there in the store. And so I found somebody, a little welding shop, to make blanks for me. And so I made up a couple of dozen, covered them, and fixed them up, and where I thought they were looking pretty nice. And I had been going out to the Dallas-Fort Worth airport quite a bit because a cousin of mine worked out there, and we'd go out there at night and hang out. So I talked to the lady in the gift shop there, and so I sold my first buckles, other than through Tandy's. I sold my first buckles. I sold them a dozen to the gift shop there in Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And it wasn't no time till she called and wanted some more. And so that's how the leather-covered buckles, the kits that you buy at Tandy's now, that's how they got started. They asked me to build a kit for a purse kit, design a purse kit. And so I did that, and everybody liked it, and whoever I was dealing with asked me how much that they owed me, and I, talking about making choices, I didn't make a very good choice. I said, oh well, I got so many hours in it, just pay me by the hour, just like I was working at the store. So that's what they did. I think I got $18, $20 for designing the purse, and they put it in the catalog, and it stayed in the catalog for several years. Every once in a while they'd change the name of it, but it was still the same kit. And then it wasn't in there for years, but just in the last year, I believe, their newest, after the leather factory bought out Tandy, and Tandy has started a little heavier program again. Well, I noticed that it's back in there now. I forget what they call it, but it's still the same purse. They've changed names and had put a different tooling pattern on it, but it's still the same purse.